Hello. What is Moonstone, and why is it one of the most exciting, innovating, and wonderfully whimsical wargames on the market? Drawing on diverse inspirations like folklore, fairy tales, and the incredible art from Brian Froud that made Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal so memorable, Moonstone is a 28mm miniature skirmish game that features some of the best looking minis this side of the 41st millennium, and it has a unique rule set that draws as much on miniature wargames as it does on classic CCGs like Magic the Gathering, and all of that is wrapped up in a beautiful fantasy world populated by goblins, pirates, fairies, ogres, witches, and ginormous jackrabbits. I have got a copy of Moonstone and some other goodies to give away. But before that, I want to find out why it's so fun to play. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm exploring the origins and the overview of Moonstone. Right, so before we get into the magic of Moonstone, I guess I should say why I'm making a video about it at all. Well, I am a huge fantasy fan and a huge miniatures fan, and of course, I'm a huge Warhammer fan. And when I take a look at tabletop games, anything that can put together all of those three things in some combination and draw on it in some way is going to be something that I'm kind of interested by. And of course, when I saw Moonstone, this game that has this sort of labyrinth-esque visual appeal, all of these amazing goblins and fairies, giants, trolls and ogres, humans that look like zany empire engineers and awesome duelists, all of that stuff together made me very attracted to this game. I was really eager to take a look and to try and understand more about it. So every time I saw it on a shelf in a store, I was very tempted to pick up a copy. And then I bought my own starter set. Now, with these things, as I'm sure you can imagine, as I'm sure you experience, I have a bit of a backlog. So I put that amazing looking starter set onto one side and then didn't necessarily forget about it, but certainly didn't get round to starting it in anything like a reasonable amount of time. But because this game reminds me of a name, what name? A name with the power. What power? Not a name, a movie. I was really intrigued to get round to it at some point. And then at the UK Games Expo, I was given just the push I needed. Whilst I was there, I got to see the absolutely stunning display games that Goblin King Games, the publishers of Moonstone, had set up. Fantastic forest boards and pirate-plagued piers. I've actually linked down below a blog post on the Moonstone website from board builder Mick that talks about the creation of that terrain, and it is well worth a read. Fantastic inspiration and incredible results. And they did exactly what they were supposed to, because seeing the incredible fun on those tables and seeing the world brought to life in that way, it just got me super excited to get playing it. I reached out to Goblin King Games to tell them that I was really interested in making some content about Moonstone, and they were awesome. Not only did they let me interview Tom Greenway, the creator of Moonstone and the founder of Goblin King Games, I also got to chat with Susie V.G. Thorne, who is the lead story writer for the game's setting and for its story. And we had some really fun conversations. But not only that, did they also provide me with some free stuff? Yes, they did. I don't know why I phrased it like a question. They did provide me with some free stuff that I could give away. So I've already done a giveaway exclusive to my patrons where I do a monthly giveaway and you just have to join my Patreon in order to get access to that. I'm also going to be doing a giveaway here on YouTube where you can get hold of the starter set for Moonstone and some of the books as well. We'll talk about that at the end of this video. So why don't we get started now talking about what exactly Moonstone is. Simply put, Moonstone is a 28mm skirmish wargame. Each player uses from 4 to 6 models representing goblins or humans, fairies or goblins, pirates, giants or Did I say goblins? It's played on a 3-foot by 3-foot board, and the aim of the game is to dig up the magical moonstones of the title, represented using 4-sided dice that have been scattered across the board randomly. Combat and magic are resolved using hands of cards. There's no complex army list building, and a typical game is done in less than an hour. At the previous UK Games Expo in 2023, Moonstone was actually awarded the Best Miniatures Rules and the Best Miniatures Range awards. And it's not hard to see why. They're both really fun. The rules are quite clever and innovative, and the miniatures, well, they are just gorgeous. But we'll come back around to both of those. Before we get into that, why don't we start by just talking a bit more about the development of the game. The origins of Moonstone date back to 2018, when creator Tom Greenway decided it was about time to really get started making something more cohesive, a game that was going to actually be a physical thing. He'd been playing around making other types of rules and collaborating with friends on simple rule sets that could be uploaded and given away for free. But in 2018, he reached out to a sculptor, Tom Lishman, to actually create the first miniatures for what would become Moonstone. Tom wanted to test Kickstarter as a way to develop and sell an entirely new game. That miniature, the Goblin Fire Spitter, was launched as a Kickstarter in early 2019. Buoyed by that success, it wasn't long before the Moonstone starter set was launched as well, followed by successful campaigns like The Arising, which expanded the game and added new factions and new story. When I spoke with Tom, he told me more about the actual origins and inspirations behind the creation of the game.
The artwork of Brian Froud was my key inspiration. So he was the art director behind the movie The Labyrinth. He sketched out all the characters, also Dark Crystal. Unbeknownst to me, even though they were my favourite movies as a kid, I also was collecting his books. So this whimsical art style, I just loved it. I still do. And kind of one of my objectives was create characters which, if they popped up in the movie The Labyrinth, wouldn't look out of place.
Right.
The sort of fairy tale, whimsical, madder, sillier angle that Moonstone's gone with, I just didn't see a huge amount of representation of it in the miniature space, even though I absolutely adore it. I think Rackham and Confrontation had a lot of that. And by the time I was coming along with Moonstone, they'd stopped trading, and I think that sort of left a bit of a gap. Also, when I first started to launch Moonstone, Warhammer Fantasy had shifted from kind of the old world aesthetic into the Age of Sigmar aesthetic, which is new again, a very, very, very high fantasy, and it kind of left an even bigger space for more of a quaint, sweet, tongue-in-cheek, humorous kind of fantasy setting. So that may have just been good timing, but what I happen to love didn't really have very good representation in the market at the time.
This was one of the first things that drew me to the game. Whilst creating its own consistently brilliant world, the designers have absolutely captured some essence of Brian Froud's goblins and fairies and monsters, as well as that somewhat madcap spirit of Warhammer, which is present with characters like this human engineer. That last comparison is an interesting one to me because of my intense love for Warhammer Fantasy. It's hard to separate new miniatures wargames from Warhammer, I think, given how important and just the scale of Warhammer in the tabletop space, in history, in culture, and just, in shops even. So this shadow, this colossus, is casting a shadow all over the tabletop market. So anyone who creates something new is going to have to work within that shadow. But there's so much potential to explore new and different takes on stuff and to expand in different and interesting ways. And one of the things that I really like about Moonstone is that it does draw on some of that kind of goofy and zany stuff from earlier Warhammer Fantasy that didn't always make it all the way through as it became grimmer and darker. Now, Moonstone has lots of dark elements because it's drawing on folklores and fairy tales. This is Billy Goat Gruff and the trolls under the bridge and all of that kind of stuff. That's absolutely in this, and the potential for grim, as in the Brothers Grimm, kind of resolutions to stories is very much a part of Moonstone. But it's also got that goofy, zany, wild madness that Games Workshop's Warhammer stuff has had in the past as well. Whether it's a snotling pump wagon or an engineer riding a mechanical steed, that kind of stuff is absolutely the kind of thing that is being lent into in Moonstone. This kind of really inventive and fun fantasy stuff. Airships and goblins and flamethrowers and all sorts of weird and wonderful inventions, wacky, magical creatures. It's all in this game, and that is really, really fun. It captures some kind of spirit of a certain essence of the sort of madcap worlds that have existed in the past in a sort of Warhammer or Warhammer adjacent kind of products and game ranges, and brings all of that stuff to a very modern place with modern sensibilities for both the story and the world and the writing, how that's evolved, how it progresses through new products, and then through the modern rules as well, which are really super innovative. The game takes place in the magical land of Torba, which is a relatively peaceful place because a peace treaty has been keeping everything under control for a period of time. The old king was overthrown, and 2 new dominant powers have risen up to create a sort of roughly comfortable status quo. But that all changes whenever the moon is full and fat, because then the moonstones sprout from the ground. And when that happens, that creates quite a lot of friction, because the moonstones are this incredibly valuable resource. That's what we fight over in the game. They're represented by D4s that are scattered across the map randomly. It's a really fun mechanism. But then you're trying to get hold of those moonstones because they're worth a lot of money, or they have a lot of magical essence. They can do a lot of amazing things within the story. So in the game, you're fighting to get hold of them. And within the world, that has brought out all of the sort of treasure seekers and the magical wanderers and lots of different factions who all want to get hold of that core important resource. So who are these factions? Well, there are 4 main factions available in the game today. The Commonwealth is the largest and wealthiest faction in the game, comprised mainly of human nobles, gnomes, and giants, who banded together to throw off the shackles of the Forgotten King and seek out new prosperity for the people of Torba. Considered to be a good all-round faction with strong fighters who can weather a great deal of damage, the Commonwealth is often recommended as a good starter faction for new players. The Dominion have become one of the dominant forces across Tauber, a collection of species formed by the Goblin King, Diana Queen of the Fae, and the human Duchess Noravia Default. Although they are likely to lose any fair fight to stronger opponents, the Dominion very rarely find themselves having to put up a fair fight at all, as they are masters of ambush, sneaking, and subterfuge. Then you've got the Leshervolt, a faction made up of fauns, animals, and faithful humans. The Leshervolt worship the powerful nature god Leshavit, some believers embracing entropy and destruction, decay and damnation, whilst others worship rebirth and tradition. In combat, the Leshervolt can take on many flavours: fast, unpredictable, and always arcane. And then finally, there is the most recent faction, the Shades of Moonreach, who are a quite unusual bunch of lads. An ancient mad king was recently released from his deathless prison by the foolish rituals of a council of wizards, and it's not clear if they really knew what they were getting themselves into. The dead King Sherrit has set about releasing and resurrecting his dead and extremely dangerous followers, and now they have joined the quest to capture the Moonstones. One of the things that really appeals to me about Moonstone is just how integral the story and the setting are to the progress of the actual game itself. New rules, new factions, new products all emerge from this sort of, well, they don't emerge necessarily, but they run in parallel with this very smartly constructed story that's progressing things forward. There's a sort of narrative expectation, there's a known kind of endpoint for this universe, and things are moving towards that. And as it moves forward, new factions are being introduced, new characters are being introduced, characters change and evolve. So there's actually different versions of characters from when if you take Eric, for instance, who starts as a squire, through a global campaign, it was possible to influence which faction he would grow up to join in time, and he became Eric the Knight. And that is a really fun way to progress this world, I think. Now, I was very lucky in that I got to chat with Susie VG Thorne, who is the head writer for the setting and the story of Moonstone.
Moonstone is a whimsical fantasy story and game, and is a world of different fantasy races. So you've got fairies, I mentioned, and goblins, gnomes, humans, merfolk, giants, trolls, fauns, all of that kind of stuff. And the aim of the game and the kind of the name of the world being Moonstone is to dig up these mystical glowing stones that appear at night time, and are worth a fortune if sold to another race of people who are the wizards, called the Elrich. That's the name of the race, and they give a fortune to anybody who digs them up. So all of the races loosely fall into one of the three factions that exist at the moment. I say loosely because there are some exceptions to the rule, some that are dual faction, and some which are different in flavour of the faction. So humans, for example, primarily of Commonwealth, but there is a Dominion faction, which are the kind of the long-lived nobles that lived back when the original Moonstone bloom was happening 400 or 500 years ago, if not before. And also the pirates are Dominion as well. And it's mainly those two that really are at loggerheads. And the third faction is the Leshavult. And the Leshavult are a group of people who worship a god called Leshavit. And all of the worshippers of Leshavit are called Leshavult by people who aren't within that religion. But it's actually split into two halves. There are the cultists, who are the Leshavult, and they are all about the entropy and chaos that Leshavit stands for. So the real wild side of nature. So he's kind of based on Leshy, or a little bit on Kanunanos as well. So it's that kind of nature god is that origin. So they're the kind of the real like harsh side of nature is what the Leshavult worship. But then there are also the worshippers of Leshavit, who are about the balance of nature. So yes, there is the wild side, but actually there is the calm as well. And then we've just introduced the fourth faction, which are the Shades, which are the retinue of that king I referenced, who when he was killed, they were buried underground, but his magic sustained them, and they are now returning to the world of Torba. With them returning, there's also some other spirits being brought back from the Deadlands. And so the Shades are the undead, or fundead, as we like to call them, because they're whimsical as well. So they're not necessarily your typical undead. There are some fun bits. There are some of them which are very obviously like zombie-esque, but they're quite fun as well.
There are plenty of basic rules within Moonstone that will be very familiar to anyone who's played a miniatures wargame before. Things like moving and line of sight. But then there are some real innovations and deviations from the norm that I think add an incredible sort of flavour and character to this game, to this world. So, for instance, there is no army building. You don't build a list in the same way using points as you might in certain other wargames. In this, it's purely based on model count. And there are lots of synergies in the special rules, certain hero models who will anchor a list, but really you're looking for just a small number of characters to take into a battle. So it's 4 characters for a beginner game, 5 characters for a first game, and then 6 characters for sort of standard, longer game. Another key rule that I think is awesome is how you set up the objectives for the game. They are these D4. So these each represent one of the Moonstones, what you're fighting over on the map. And you literally grab a handful of these and you hold your fist above the 3x3 board, and then you open your fist. And wherever they land, that is where the Moonstones are. You can mulligan and redo that if you need to, if they're all super close together and things like that. But essentially, that random distribution of the Moonstones is what gets you started. And then the number that is present on the D4 represents how deep into the ground that Moonstone is buried. And that will make it easier or harder to harvest it in the middle of the game. Each turn, characters get energy that they can spend like action points in order to run, climb, harvest Moonstones, cast spells, and attack other characters. probably the most complicated rules in the basic game are those for melee combat, but they're not really that complicated overall. There is a single shared deck of 18 cards, featuring 3 each of different types of attack and defense. At the start of combat, attackers get to draw cards up to their melee stat, +2, and defenders just draw their stat. There's then this opportunity to bluff and play different cards as you choose one card and place it face down, and then reveal them simultaneously. So, depending on what card you actually reveal from your hand, whether that's a thrust, or a high guard, or a falling swing, or a sweeping cut, this will actually determine how much damage you're going to do to your enemy, and their card is going to determine how much damage they'll do to you, because you'll compare the two. So you'll actually see, well, if I've done a sweeping cut and you've done a high guard, let's take a look on this card, run down the numbers, and see how much damage that's going to cause. And in some cases, the certain thrust and parry will mean that no damage is done. In some cases, the attacker will do damage. In some cases, the defender will damage the attacker, and no damage will actually be done to them. Or in other cases, you both might take damage. So there's this real duel-like quality, a kind of mini-game essence to the melee combat. It is really, really fun. It's very engaging. It's sort of a randomized kind of puzzle to solve. You're not just playing your own hand and making your own decisions about what your character is going to do. You're trying to predict what the opposing character is going to do. What cards might they have, and what kind of defense might they play? And that is a really fun thing. Once you get to grips with it, it becomes really quick, and you progress through it super fast. And it's an engaging way to perform the combat that doesn't rely on tables of numbers and very clear targeted set target numbers, because you're interacting through the combat. So that's very fun and very interesting, I think. And actually, Magic uses a similar-ish card-based system that's got a lot of opportunity for randomized successes and failures, unexpected results. But here is Tom Greenway again talking about some of the card mechanics and how he came up with them.
I did look at other games, board games mechanics and card games mechanics for inspiration, rather than just purely looking at what other miniatures games have done in the past. And with kind of the list building side of things, I was very much looking at TCGs. Magic the Gathering, for example, you have a kind of a set number of cards in your deck. I know you can go above it, but most people do 60. There's only 5 factions, red, green, blue. And I kind of wanted that same kind of thing where there's only 4 factions in Moonstone, but that doesn't mean there's only 4 ways to play. Within each faction, there's not quite infinite, but there's a huge number of different ways that you can combine different pieces. So that is very inspired by card games, even though it's nothing to do with actually, having the physical cards. I always liked card mechanics more than dice. I do like dice; they have their role. They're great when you just need to generate a random result, but I like it with cards because the randomness happens first, then you make a decision. So you always have agency. You draw your hand of cards, then you make a decision. We do the core scenario where you hold a fistful of moonstones and you drop them and they scatter all over the table. Basically, it makes it very hard to solve the puzzle in advance. You can't kind of plan out your first turn. I know I'm always going to do this activation with that model, and I'm going to activate this, because you just don't know what the game state's going to be until you've made it start. And also with the card mechanics that we use, you can't, with dice, I find that you can kind of work out the maths in advance. So you know that if I've got 12 attacks hitting on 4s, I'm going to get 6 on average, which means I can kill that model, but not that model. You can kind of maths it out in advance, and you can't with the card mechanics that we have, because I don't know what my best card is until you play your card and we reveal simultaneously. So you can't really solve Moonstone. It doesn't matter how many times you play it. You never really get into a groove where you're just doing the same thing every game. It's always different. And you're always having to think and kind of work out what your opponent wants to do. Because if you can work out what they want to do, you can do the best thing against it. But if they know that you know what their best thing is, they'll actually do something else instead. So it's got a lot of sort of replayability, I think, because of those card mechanics and because of the randomized objectives.
I saved the best bit for last. Now, I should, just before we get into the miniatures, mention that the art for this game is lovely. It's really, really nice. It's so characterful, and that flows through into the miniatures. They are so well sculpted, and they're full of character in every great possible way you can imagine. These are individual characters that just really leap off of the table because they're so interesting and fun. I am not surprised at all that this won an award for Best Miniature Range because it's fantastic. That Freudian style design is present in the best possible way, but it doesn't look like a rip-off or a cheap imitation. It looks like a respectful and wonderful homage. Inspiration has been drawn, but turned and reworked into something unique and very much of its own world. I'm quite partial to the absurd and over-the-top stuff, like the Goblin's Beaky Bobby, Portly Pete, or the truly magnificent Goblin airship. But then I also really like the Queen of the Fae, and Baron von Fancy Hat, and Sir Hogswash. It's almost Python-esque in parts, and there's just so much here to enjoy. To be honest, I don't know that I have the faculty with language to really do these miniatures justice. They're great. So I recommend taking a look at some of them, having a look at the range, because they're just really, really fun. So that is Moonstone, or at least my quick overview of the game. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that some of my enthusiasm and excitement for the game came across, because I am really enjoying reading it and playing it and getting into it. I can't wait to read and play and just spend more time in Moonstone's world, and I would love an excuse. So let me know if you're getting into Moonstone as well, and whether or not I should make some more content about this game, because yeah, it would be fun. Thank you to Tom and to Susie for chatting with me. You can watch the entirety of my interview with Tom, and I've put a link to that in the description below. My interview with Susie is available exclusively for patrons, and if you want to go and support me over on Patreon, I've put a link to that down below as well. You'll get early and exclusive access to content, regular updates, Discord, a monthly giveaway, including most recently a giveaway of Moonstone, and before that, Warhammer Quest Lost Relics. I'm doing that until the end of this year, every single month, a giveaway, just a random prize draw. I did promise that there would be a random prize draw here on the channel as well. Some treasure, some Moonstone that I'm going to be giving away. So I have to deliver on that. So if you would like the chance to win a Moonstone 2-player starter set, the core rulebook and the Arising supplement book, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let me know which of the 4 Moonstone factions you think is the coolest. Leave a comment down below, and I will draw one of them at random and announce it here on the channel on September 4th. So that's it, super easy. Good luck to everybody. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. I think the coolest faction is probably, well, yeah, okay. No, actually,